The wind howled across the broken planet. The sky was dark, full of ash and dust. Ruined buildings stood like skeletons, cold and lifeless. Snow mixed with gray sand fell from above, making everything look dead. The war was over, but the pain still lived in the air. Evan, a human scavenger, walked carefully over cracked ground. He wore a torn coat and carried a small pack on his back. Every day, he searched for old tech and metal to trade for food. He had been alone for months, trusting no one. Most people in the camp were broken, just like the world around them. That night, it was colder than usual. His breath turned to mist. As he stepped over a fallen wall, he planned to return to his tent and eat his last piece of bread. But then he heard it, a soft, weak cry, like a whisper in the wind. Evan froze, listening again. There it was, a sound of someone in pain. Not a scream, but something worse, like someone had no strength left to scream. He followed the sound, behind a collapsed building, and there he saw her, a female alien, curled up on the ground, hugging a small bundle to her chest. Her skin was pale blue, shaking like a leaf. Her eyes were half open, lips dry, and her clothes were almost nothing. She had nothing to cover herself, just old rags. The child in her arms didn't move, wrapped in thin scraps. Evan looked around, but no one else was there. She had been left to die in the cold. Slowly, he stepped forward. She blinked at him, trying to sit up, but failed. "Please," she whispered. "Baby." Cold. Evan knelt beside her, looking at the baby first. Its tiny chest moved alive, but weak. He pulled off his own blanket from his pack. It's the only one he had. It was old, patched many times, but still warm. Without thinking, he wrapped it around her and the child. The alien woman gasped as the warmth touched her skin. Tears formed in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She looked at him like he was something strange. Not a soldier, not a scavenger, not a threat, but something else. "Why?" she asked in a broken voice. Evan didn't answer. He just sat next to her in the dirt and rubble, sharing his body heat. The stars above were cold and far away. But right there in that moment, something changed, for the first time in a long time. He didn't feel alone. More wind came through the ruins. Evan pulled his coat tighter, but still stayed close. The baby let out a soft sound, a tiny breath. The woman closed her eyes, whispering something in her own language he didn't understand, but he felt it: gratitude, hope, and fear. A few minutes later, others passed by. They looked at Evan with the alien widow and shook their heads. One man muttered, "You'll freeze for nothing." Another laughed, "She's not worth a blanket." Evan said nothing. He didn't move until the baby stopped shaking, until the woman could sit up with his help. Then he guided them slowly toward the edge of the camp. His tent was small, barely enough for one person. But that night, it held three. He gave her water, shared half his bread, and watched her feed the child. She was still cold, still weak, but alive. She didn't ask for his name, and he didn't ask for hers. But in her eyes, there was something powerful, something no war could kill: trust. That night, Evan sat beside them as they slept under the same blanket. He stayed awake, keeping the small fire alive with broken wood. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what tomorrow would bring. But in that moment, with snow falling softly outside and quiet breathing near him, he felt something warm in his chest, a connection, a beginning, and maybe, just maybe, a reason to keep going. The morning sun peeked through thick clouds. Ash still floated in the air, mixing with light, cold wind. The camp was waking. Slowly people moved like shadows, tired and hungry, in the corner of the tent. Nyari opened her eyes. She blinked, unsure where she was at first. The fire was still burning, small but steady. Beside it sat the human, Evan. Watching the flames in silence, her baby slept quietly. Wrapped in the warm blanket he had given them, She studied him with quiet eyes. His coat was dusty, his hands rough, but his face was calm. Not angry, not cruel, not scared of her. Just tired, maybe, but gentle. He noticed her gaze, turned his head, and gave her a small nod. "You and the baby," he said. "You're safe now." She didn't understand every word, but she felt it in his voice, kindness, not pity. Evan offered her a water flask, and she drank slowly. Her throat still hurt from the cold. She tried to speak Niari, she whispered. Pointing to herself, he nodded again. "Niari," he repeated. "I'm Evan." Their names now hung in the air, two broken souls with something shared. After feeding the baby from a small cup, she looked around the tent. There was almost nothing inside, no comfort, no extras, just one man's will to survive. And now he had chosen to share it later that day. Evan walked through the camp to trade some wires he had found. Behind him, Niari watched from the edge of the tent flap. Her eyes followed him, quiet but alert. People stared at her. Some whispered, "She's still here." He really kept her. But she didn't lower her head. She had done that for too long already. Instead, she looked at them and they looked away. Evan returned with a small can of soup and a few old cloths. He sat beside her and handed her the food first. "No need to thank me," he said softly. But she still pressed her hands together in front of her chest. "Thank you, Evan," she said carefully. Her voice slow but sure. Every night after that, Evan returned from scavenging with whatever he found. Food, firewood, even a pair of worn shoes for her. Niari helped clean the tent, boiled water, and took care of her baby. Though her body was still weak, her spirit began to rise. Evan noticed small things, the way she smiled softly at her child, the way she whispered lullabies in her alien tongue, how she always waited for him to return before eating, as if he was the only thing that made her feel safe. One evening, a cold wind returned. Evan handed her the blanket again, but she gently pushed it back into his hands. "You cold?" she said, and then did something unexpected. She opened the blanket and moved closer. Making room for both of them, he hesitated for a second, then sat beside her. The baby lay between them, quiet and warm. Kiri rested her head on Evan's shoulder. Eyes closed, Evan didn't move, didn't speak. His heart was beating louder than before, but not from fear, something else. "Comfort, maybe," Niari whispered. "I'm not scared when you hear." Evan looked at her, his voice soft. "You don't have to be." Days passed. Their little family of 3 began to feel real. Evan made a small toy from old wires for the child. Niari cooked roots she found behind the camp. They spoke more mixed human and alien words. Laughter sometimes filling the air, but not everyone was happy. A group of alien men from the camp watched them closely. They didn't like what they saw. "She's ours." One of them spat quietly one night. "Stolen by a human," said another. Trouble was growing like a storm on the edge of the sky. But for now, inside that little tent, it was calm. Niari sat beside Evan, brushing his arm gently. She had found something more than just safety. She had found a reason to live again. And Evan, who had once lived with silence and rusted dreams, now had a voice beside him, a child reaching for his finger, and soft eyes that followed him everywhere he went. The blanket they shared was old and torn, but the warmth it carried now was stronger than fire. It wasn't just cloth anymore. It was trust. It was hope. It was love, starting in small pieces, but growing, one heartbeat at a time. Niari stood by the edge of the broken field, her child strapped gently to her chest. The wind played with her faded scarf, and behind her, Evan gathered broken wires from a wrecked pod. The sun was dull, hidden behind thick clouds, but she could feel warmth, not from the sky, but from the man who walked beside her each day. She watched Evan fix a small power cell, hands steady, movements calm. He didn't speak much while working, but she liked the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that hurt. Like the prison camps, it was peaceful. It was safe. Niar. Evan said as he stood up and brushed dust from his knees. You okay? She nodded slowly, but her eyes looked far away. Somewhere deeper, somewhere darker. Later that night, as they sat around a tiny flame outside the tent, Niari finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but the words were heavy. I want to tell you something, she said. Evan looked at her, quiet and listening. The baby was asleep between them, wrapped in the blanket they now shared every night. My mate, she started. He died in war. Evan gave a small nod, but didn't interrupt. He tried to help me and baby. But we caught. She paused, struggling with the memory. Her eyes flicked to the fire. Then down to her hands. They took us, she whispered. They say we dirty blood. Evan frowned, confused. Dirty blood. Niari nodded, her voice trembling. I am not full blood, she said. My father was from enemy line. Her fingers tightened on her dress. In my world, that means shame. Evan stared at her, then slowly reached out and placed his hand over hers. Not shame, he said simply. Niari looked up, shocked by how easily he said it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. No one say that to me before, she whispered. No one, she continued. In camp, they give me no food, no blanket, no help. She lifted the child gently, touching the baby's soft cheek. Only my baby kept me breathing. Her voice cracked as she added, and then, everyone gone. Left me behind. Evan's hand stayed on hers, warm and steady. She leaned her head on his shoulder again, like she had done a few nights ago, but this time it was not just for warmth. It was trust, a moment of sharing a wound she had buried deep. I was not ready to live again, she whispered, but then you gave us hope. Behind them, in the shadows of the camp, someone watched. One of the alien mental, strong eyes, sharp, stood with arms crossed. His name was Kor, and he had known Nairi's family before the war. He didn't like what he saw, a human with her, close, protective, trusted. It stirred something ugly inside him. She dishonors her blood, he muttered, with a human. Kor wasn't alone. Two others stood behind him, listening, nodding. The jealousy was growing. They had seen her helpless, silent, dirty, and forgotten. But now, she smiled. Now, she sang to her baby in the morning. Now, she was alive again. And it was because of a human. The next day, Evan returned from scavenging with a new, fine-dan old solar panel. Kaya clapped softly and helped him clean it. But later, when they returned to the tent, something was wrong. The fire pit had been kicked over and someone had slashed the front of the tent. The inside was untouched, but the message was clear. Evan stood quietly, staring at the damage. Niari grabbed her child protectively, eyes full of fear. Why? She asked, her voice shaking. He looked at her and said calmly, because some people hate what they don't understand. That night, Evan sat outside with a metal pipe beside him. Niari stayed close, her baby in her lap. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she looked at him and said, I not go. Evan turned to her. I wouldn't let you, he replied. They shared no more words that night, only a quiet understanding inside the torn tent. They fixed what they could. Outside, the camp whispered and watched. Some felt anger, some felt curiosity, but one thing was becoming clear. Evan and Niari were not weak. They were together, and together they were stronger. The next morning, Niari walked through the camp without hiding her face. She carried her baby with pride and returned greetings with a nod. When someone tried to mock her, she stared them down with calm eyes. Evan followed close, not as a protector, but as a partner. She had buried her past under pain and silence, but now She had spoken it aloud, and the world hadn't ended. She had shared her wounds. And instead of being left behind again, she was held, listened to. Respected Nyari was no longer just a widow. She was something more, a woman finding her strength again. And Evan, without meaning to, had helped her rise from the ashes. The air that night was colder than usual. The kind of cold that slipped into bones and stayed there. Evan sat outside the tent. Sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a rough blade, he had started doing that since the tent was slashed, not because he wanted a fight but because he knew one might come. Inside, Nyari sang softly to her baby. The alien lullaby floated in the night air, full of strange tones and soft hums. It was beautiful, even if Evan didn't understand the words. She looked peaceful, her eyes calm as she wrapped the child in layers of cloth, but Evan knew she was still scared. Earlier that day, a group of men had passed them while laughing loudly. They hadn't said anything directly, but their eyes full of hate had said enough. And Evan had seen one of them brush his hand against the firewood pile beside their tent. Too casually, too slowly. Evan watched the stars now, arms crossed. He didn't sleep much anymore, not since the stares started turning into actions. He checked the fire again, then turned to go inside. But just then, he smelled it. Smoke, not from their own fire, but thick, dark, wrong. It came from behind the tent, quickly growing. Evan ran around back, and his heart dropped. Someone had piled dry wood and lit it near the cloth wall. Flames licked upward, growing fast. The back of the tent was catching Nyari. He shouted. She rushed out with the baby in her arms, eyes wide in terror. Evan grabbed a bucket they used for washing and tossed sand onto the flames. He shouted for help, but no one came. The fire spread too fast. He ripped a part of the tent off and beat the flames with it. His hands burned. But he didn't stop. Nyari held the child tightly and backed away. Coughing, the baby was crying now, frightened by the heat and smoke. Finally, after long minutes, the fire died. All that was left was blackened cloth, ruined supplies, and the smell of hate. Evan's hands were red and blistered. He didn't speak, just stood there breathing heavily. Nyari walked to him and gently touched his hand. "You saved us again," she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked down at her. Trying to smile, "It's okay now," he said. But he didn't believe it. The tent was half gone, not safe anymore. They couldn't stay. They're not with enemies hiding in the shadows, so Evan made a choice. "We'll move," he said. Outside the camp, Nyari blinked, surprised. "Far." "Not far," Evan replied. "Just where they can't burn our home again." They packed what little they had, blanket, some tools, and a pot. Evan used leftover canvas to build a small shelter near the edge of the ruined forest. No one helped them, but no one followed either. It was quiet there, colder too, but safer in its own way. No eyes watching, no whispers, just trees, broken machines, and stars above. Nyari made a small fire while Evan set up the frame. They worked together without many words now. Their movements were in sync, like they had known each other for years. When the shelter was ready, they sat beside the fire. Nyari wrapped the baby in the blanket and tucked herself close to Evan. She noticed his hands burned, swollen, raw, without asking. She pulled his hands into her lap and gently applied a cool cloth. Evan winced at first, but didn't pull away. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. Nyari looked up, her voice soft but firm. "You protect me," she said. "I protect you." He looked into her eyes and saw something new. Not just survival, not just gratitude, but something deep, something blooming in the cold. That night, they slept close, all three under one blanket again. The baby's hand rested against Evan's chest. Nyari's head rested beneath his chin. The fire outside flickered low, but the warmth between them never faded. In the early morning, when the world was still blue and quiet, Evan woke to find Nyari already outside. She was standing barefoot in the snow, her arms raised toward the sky. A soft humming sound left her lips like a prayer or a memory. She turned when she heard him and smiled. "Where I from?" she said. "We sing to sky." When new life begins, Evan walked to her, still barefoot, and stood beside her in silence. He didn't know the song, but somehow he understood every word. They had lost everything, homes, families, past lives, but now they had this, anew. Fire in the cold, a small shelter, a child's laughter, a shared breath in the dark, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. Snow had melted around the edge of the forest. Spring was trying to return, but the air still bit with cold at night. Evan's small shelter stood steady near a broken tower. He had reinforced it with metal sheets, and Nyari had stitched warm coverings from old cloth. The place didn't look like much, but it was theirs. It was home. Nyari was growing stronger each day. She laughed more now, and her baby, whom Evan had started calling Little One, was learning to sit up. Evan had never thought he would be part of something like this. A woman, a child, peace. But peace was never safe for long. That morning, while Evan repaired a broken water filter, Nyari walked toward the tree line. She had begun foraging for roots and edible herbs. She promised to stay close and take the knife he gave her. Evan smiled and said, "Be back before the cold." She nodded and kissed the baby's forehead before leaving. He watched her go, proud and worried at the same time. She had grown brave, but some dangers were not like the cold or hunger. Some dangers had a voice, a weapon, and no heart. An hour later, the baby cried suddenly. It wasn't a hungry cry. It was sharp, scared. Evan jumped to his feet, grabbed his blade, and scanned the edge of the trees. Then he heard it, a scream, Nyari's scream. He ran, boots crunching dirt and leaves. The sound led him deeper into the trees. Then he saw her. Nyari was on the ground, one knee bleeding. A man stood over her, tall and armored, holding a gun. His face was half covered with an old mercenary mask. He didn't look surprised to see Evan. "Stay where you are," the man growled. "She belongs to me now, Evans." Jaw clenched, he stepped forward anyway. "You need to leave," Evan said firmly. The man laughed. "You think I care about your little setup out here?" "She's worth trade credits to someone," he added, kicking snow near Nyari's face. Evan's grip on the blade tightened. "She's not property," he said slowly. "She's my family." The mercenary aimed the gun at Evan. "Then maybe." "I'll take you both," he said, "and sell the kid for parts." That's when something changed. Nyari lunged up from the ground. Grabbing a thick tree branch with both hands, with a wild cry, she swung it at the man's leg. He stumbled, surprised. Before he could recover, Evan rushed in and slammed his shoulder into the mercenary's chest. The two men fell into the dirt, rolling. The gun slipped from his hand, landing in the snow. Evan punched him once, twice, before being thrown off. The mercenary grabbed a knife from his boot and charged, but Nyari threw the tree branch again, hitting his side. That was enough time. Evan tackled him once more and forced the knife from his hand. The mercenary gasped as Evan held the blade to his throat. "You leave," Evan said, his voice shaking with rage. "You come back, I bury you." The man spit blood, but didn't argue. He got up slowly and limped away. Back into the trees, Evan watched him go, never lowering the blade. When the danger was gone, Evan turned to Nyari. Her lip was bleeding, and her leg had a deep cut, but she was smiling. "You fought him," Evan said, surprised. She nodded. "I protect you." "Like you protect me." Back at the shelter, Evan cleaned her wounds. The baby crawled between them. Unaware of what had almost happened, Evan wrapped Nyari's knee with cloth. and held her hand gently. "Next time, don't go far alone," he said. She gave a soft laugh. "Next time, I take 2 knives." That night, they stayed close around the fire. The stars above looked down like watchers in the dark. Evan felt his heart beating faster, not from fear this time, but from something warm, strong, alive. Nyari leaned against him and whispered, "He say, I belong to him." Evan looked into her eyes and said, "No, you belong to no one." She nodded slowly. "Then I choose." She placed her hand on his chest, just over his heart. "I choose to belong." Here, Evan covered her hand with his. There was no need for more words. Outside, the trees stood silent again, but inside the small shelter, something powerful had taken root. A bond made in fire, sealed in blood, protected by choice, not chains, and no mercenary, no enemy, no fear could take that away. Asterisk snow melted slowly over the coming days. The camp, once frozen and lifeless, began to show signs of change, but change did not come easily, especially not for those who were watched, judged, and whispered about. Evan and Nyari stayed in the shelter near the trees. They kept to themselves, but news of the mercenary spread. Some believed it, some didn't. Some said Evan made it up. Others whispered that the alien widow had bewitched him, but none of it mattered to Evan. He had no interest in their words. Only in the safety of the small family he had found. Nyari's leg was healing. Slowly but well. She refused to rest for long. She gathered firewood again, cooked simple meals, and always kept the baby close. Evan offered to do everything, but she shook her head. "I am strong," she said one night, "because you showed me I am," one morning. While Evan repaired a heat panel beside the camp wall, Nyari walked toward the trader station. Holding a small cloth pouch, it was filled with herbs and roots she had gathered worth something to trade. Evan didn't like her going alone. But she had insisted, "I want to help," she said, and he had trusted her to be careful at the station. The leader of the supply chain was an old alien, male named Drell. He had never looked kindly on Nyar. When she handed him the pouch, he barely glanced inside. "Not worth much," he said coldly. "I give you half ration." Nyar stayed calm. "These roots clean water," she replied. He scowled. "You think I don't know that?" Still only half, she turned to leave, holding the small food packet, but stopped when she heard him say under his breath, "Should have let the cold take her." Nyari turned around. Slowly, "What'd you say?" she asked, voice quiet but steady. Drell looked up. Surprised, she spoke. "I said what I meant," he spat. "You bring nothing but shame-dirty blood." And now, crawling beside a human, Nyari's hands clenched. But before she could speak, someone else stepped forward. It was Kor, one of the camp guards. The same one who had watched her weeks ago. "I agree," Kor said. "She's a problem." She turned against her own kind. "Leave her alone," said a quiet voice behind them. It was Evan. Standing at the edge of the crowd, he had come after hearing raised voices. Kor laughed. "Here comes the human protector." He stepped forward, big and angry. "You think this camp belongs to you now?" Evan said nothing, just stood beside Nyari and gently took the packet from her hands. "We're leaving," he said, but Kor blocked their path. "You walk away too many times," he said. "Time to learn your place." He raised his arm, ready to strike, but before Evan could react, Nyari stepped in front of him. She raised both hands. Her voice loud and clear. "You will not touch him," she said. Kor hesitated, shocked by her sudden courage. "Move," he growled. "No," she said. Louder this time. "You call me shame," she continued. "But I've done more with pain than you've done with strength." She pointed to Evan. "He gave me life. When you gave me silence, he gave my child warmth. When you gave us cold, the crowd around them grew, people watching closely. Now, some looked ashamed, others confused. One young woman near the back whispered, "She's right." Kor's jaw tightened, but he lowered his arm. He looked around and realized something had changed. The camp wasn't laughing this time. They were listening. He pushed past them and walked away. Muttering, Drell said nothing more either, simply turned back to his booth. Evan turned to Niari, eyes wide with pride. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," she said. Still breathing fast, "I did." That night, back at their shelter, Niari sat beside Evan near the fire. Her hand rested in his, strong and steady. She looked at him with a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "You saved me before," she said, "but today, I saved you." Evan gave her a small smile. "You did?" he whispered, "and I'll never forget it." The baby giggled in its sleep, as if dreaming something warm. Evan looked at the small flame dancing before them and realized something deep. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was love, not made of soft words or easy days, but built from fire. From standing beside each other again and again. And Niari, once broken by silence, had found her voice and used it for him. Spring finally arrived in full. The air was warmer now, and tiny flowers began pushing through the cracked ground. Birds returned to the dead trees, singing songs that hadn't been heard in years. Even the wind had changed, it no longer screamed. It whispered gently, as if peace had found its way back. Evan stood outside the shelter, hammering new boards into place. The small home he and Niari had built was no longer a tent. It was real, now strong walls, a roof made from recycled metal, and even a window. He turned as he heard soft footsteps behind him. Niari stood there, her long hair tied back with a strip of cloth. The baby resting peacefully in a sling across her chest. "Looks good," she said, smiling. "Not bad for trash and wire." Evan replied with a grin. She stepped closer and looked at the finished side of the shelter. "We did this," she whispered. "Together." Evan nodded slowly. Together, that word had changed everything. Inside their small home, Niari had arranged little thingstones from the river. A hand-woven mat, a small blanket she had made herself. The baby had a sleeping corner, decorated with flowers picked from the edge of the forest. It wasn't much, but to them, it was everything. Each morning now began with warmth. Niari cooked, Evan fetched water. And the baby learned to walk between them, laughing each time he fell into their arms. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were living. Other people from the camp began visiting their new home. At first, they came quietly curious, unsure. But as time passed, things changed. One woman brought extra cloth for Niari. A child brought seeds. A young man asked Evan to help him build a shelter like theirs. Respect had come slowly, but it had come not because Evan or Niari demanded it, but because they had earned it through kindness, through strength, and through standing together when no one else would. One afternoon, the baby fell asleep early, and the wind outside was soft and warm. Evan and Niari sat beneath a tall tree, its broken limbs now blooming again. She leaned against him, and for a while they just watched the sky. "I used to dream of escape," Niari said quietly, "from the cold, the camps, the shame. But now, I do not dream of escape anymore. I dream of this," she added, resting her head on his shoulder. Evan wrapped an arm around her and looked out over the horizon. "I never thought I'd have something like this," he said. "Not after everything." She smiled. "You gave your last blanket." That started it all. He laughed softly. One old blanket for a whole future. "Seems like a fair trade." She touched his hand, her fingers warm and sure. "I want to stay," she said. "Here, with you." Evan met her eyes. "I want that too." There was no ceremony, no ring, no priest. Just two souls who had chosen each other. Their bond had already been sealed in cold nights, in shared food, in fire, in blood. In tears, weeks passed, and their home grew stronger. The roof was patched perfectly. And Evan even carved Nairi's name beside the door. The baby, now walking, proudly laughed as he chased birds in the field. They named him Ray, meaning light in Nira's language. One day, a ship landed nearby. A group of peacekeepers came, offering to relocate people to better settlements. Evan and Nairi were offered a new place, clean housing, safety, supplies. But they looked at each other and said, no, this place, this soil, this broken land, they had healed it. It had healed them. Their stories spread slowly through other camps. People spoke of the human who gave his only blanket to an alien widow. Of the widow who rose up and defended him. Of love that didn't care for species, war, or blood. One night, under the stars, Nairi sat beside Evan near the fire. Their son curled between them, sleeping soundly. She looked up and whispered, "Do you think others will believe our story?" Evan smiled. "They don't need to," he said. "We lived it." She nodded slowly and then whispered, "Thank you. For what?" He asked. "For everything," she said, her voice full of warmth. "For giving me warmth when I had nothing." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "And you gave me something I didn't know I needed." He whispered, "A reason to stay alive." They sat there, side by side, as the fire cracked softly. The world around them still bore the scars of war. But in that small corner of the galaxy, something beautiful had grown. Love, family, hope. All because one human gave his only blanket to a shivering alien widow, and in return, she gave him her heart.